The early years of the 19th century were a transition away from the aristocratic 18th century, and we saw that Neoclassicism was an attempt to redefine a new age. By the 1820s, those new ideas took root, influencing the next 70 years. The 19th century will be a century of great change, rebellions, and contrasts. We will look at 6 influences that form 19th century fashion. The first influence is the rise of mass manufacture. New factories begin producing vast numbers of consumer goods that become increasingly affordable as the century progresses. The high fashion industry that caters to the extremely wealthy will create new fashions on rapid cycles of change so that only the elite can keep up with every style. There would be significant enough changes every 5 years that would force a woman to make some major alteration to her style or risk looking out of fashion. It's hard for us to think about the kind of tyranny fashion used to hold over women, particularly. They will also see that after the relative simplicity of neoclassical fashion, dress styles will be increasingly complicated. Complex styles are difficult to make in factories, so women's wear will lag many years behind men's wear in benefiting from true ready-to-wear manufacture. The second influence will be the cult of respectability. After the excesses of the 18th century aristocrats, society valued propriety, hard work, and the outward appearance of dignity. For the first time, there was an awareness of the dignity of all things, and progressive groups agitated to end cruelty to people and animals. Society became more attuned to how people could climb the economic ladder instead of being forever classified by your birth. Consequently, people who came from poverty could rise to the middle class. This is when the self-help industry begins, publishing articles and books on proper deportment. Recall that in the 18th century, deportment set aristocrats apart from the masses. Now you could earn a better place and learn how to behave in acceptable ways. The advice covered how to wear one's clothing well. It wasn't enough to be able to afford that clothing. This print shows us what not to do. Clothing must be well fitted and kept firmly in place. Top hats were worn on top of the head, not at a jaunty angle. Clothing should not be too tight, too small, or rumpled. This was before we had credit cards and credit ratings. The only way to conduct business was to be known as an upright and dependable citizen. Your clothing, behavior, and reputation opened or closed doors to you. Manners between genders became very strict, and decent men behaved in very prescribed ways with decent women, with complex rules about tipping the hat, where to walk on the street, and all manner of tiny behaviors. Personal morality was now governed by law, not by the church. In the 1830s and 40s, countries started passing laws against cross-dressing as part of this concern for public morals. New York passed its first laws in 1845, originally to punish farmers who were dressing up as Native Americans to attack tax collectors while in disguise. The laws were increasingly pressed into service to cover wearing clothing of the opposite gender. In England, there was a celebrated couple that remains a bit of a mystery. The ladies of Llangollen were upper-class Irish women whose living arrangements and relationship upset and fascinated their neighbors. Both dressed in men's clothing, leading everyone to assume they were lesbians. However, on their death, their diaries revealed no information about their love lives, leaving everyone to forever wonder. The third influence is social separation of the genders. In the 18th century, both genders played cards, conducted topical conversations, gossiped, and took part in drinking games. Decent women could now no longer do those activities. The public sphere became forbidden to decent women whose social lives now revolved around their home, family, and church. When they did venture out, it was in groups to maintain their reputations and safety. Remember, these are middle-class and wealthy women. Anyone below that line did not matter as much, and these rules did not necessarily apply. Because of social separation, we have this fourth influence. Women's roles changed dramatically, many losing what few legal rights they had during the 18th century. Women were now considered delicate, shrinking flowers, and men were their stalwart protector. Of course, this delicate legal and moral state did not apply to working women who joined the labor force as servants in factories and mines, and who always worked on farms since the dawn of time. With the beginning of paid labor, however, as opposed to working as a family on the farm or in a family business, women were paid less. This new status of women meant that a stay-at-home mother became a class distinction for the middle classes. It meant a man's salary could support his entire family and a few extra relatives and brought status. Along with this dependent status for women was a new cult of motherhood. Mothers were expected to be the light of the home, or domestic angels. The philosophy of Romanticism made society aware that children were not small adults and that childhood was an innocent and formative time. Parenting had not been a full-time occupation until now. Wealthy children were essentially raised and educated by nannies and tutors. The middle classes educated their children to join a profession through apprenticing. They went away to study with a doctor, a lawyer, or a merchant. Once again, this ability to maintain the perfect home and create an extended childhood was a sign of status. All these notions about angelic children went out the window for the poor, where children went to work from about age 6 or 8. Child labor is one of the effects of the Industrial Revolution that drove the ideas of Romanticism, who objected to the excesses of chasing money. In the 19th century, advertising directly to the middle-class consumer is invented, and many ads marketed this new morality. Products were especially eager to aid a woman to be a better mother. These morals were reinforced everywhere people turned in the new consumerist society. The fifth influence will be an Orientalism movement. The term Orient was applied to the Near East, Turkey, Greece, and the Middle East. And during this era, North Africa and sometimes China were thrown into the mix for good measure. Europeans and Americans considered these cultures exotic and alluring, and they often carelessly lumped together in a way that we find odd all the different countries, because what mattered to people in the 19th century was the allure, the romantic aspect that the world was a wondrous place, unlike my boring job in a bank. Enough people now have leisure time and money to travel, or the time to read about it in magazines. The tourist industry is invented. Going to these locations is considered adventurous and mind-opening. We will see this influence especially in the arts, decor, and fashion throughout this century. The sixth influence is the building of grand buildings for the public. Before this, only aristocrats and their servants could enter palatial buildings. The only grand building the commoner entered in their whole lives was a church, if their town happened to be wealthy enough to have a cathedral. The entire 19th century will be about the middle classes creating for themselves what only aristocrats had in the 17th and 18th centuries. These palaces for the people include government buildings, theaters, opera houses, libraries, and museums, all of which would incorporate imposing exteriors and interiors. This fueled the desires of the wealthy middle classes to build their own version of palaces, and we will see that new invention, the suburbs, fill with mansions. At the beginning of the 19th century, Neoclassical Decor is still fashionable. What sets this apart from its early neoclassical relative is the new emphasis on fabric everywhere. The furniture is all upholstered. There are floor-to-ceiling curtains and a new invention, wall-to-wall carpeting. The Industrial Revolution is making textiles in enough quantity to be featured in the middle-class home. During this era, we will see neoclassical simplicity give way to an alarming visual array of textiles and patterns and stuff everywhere. Here we see triple layers of curtains. The sheer curtains block direct light during the day to prevent the sun from fading the carpets and the furniture. Wallpaper will be available to the middle classes with even more color and patterns, and we will start collecting items to sit on shelves and tabletops. We will also see a rise in urban architecture, and city streets begin to resemble what we see now, tall monuments lining the streets made for modes of transportation, not people. In the next few lectures, we will see the effect these 6 influences have on fashion and the zeitgeist of the early 19th century.